Hi, Gabby. Good morning for me. Good evening to you.
Hey, Reed. Good morning to you. And yes, it's evening here. And thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for coming on. I'm excited about the topic of the day today. I think there's been a lot of good advancements in the last 6 to 12 months with security. So I think there will be some interesting things to talk about for sure. One thing that I like to do with any of my guests is spend a little bit of time giving you a chance to kind of introduce yourself to the channel, share any information that you'd like about your job, but also any anecdotes about yourself or anything that you'd like to share to kind of get the conversation started and give us a chance to chat a bit before we jump into the topic of the day.
Amazing. Thanks for the opportunity, Reed. And I mean, the two of us have some history. We go way back. So I've been a member of the data platform community for a while, even before joining Microsoft. I've been working with the Microsoft partner for more than 11 years, have been an active speaker in the community. And then I had the pleasure and the honor to join Microsoft about 4.5 years ago. So a little bit before this fun product called Fabric was actually released to the world. So when I joined, the team I joined was still called the Power BI Customer Advisory Team and the team of Chris Webb. And now it's called the Azure Data Customer Advisory Team, and I'm focusing on Fabric. I'm coming from an analysis services background mostly, but have been working as a data warehouse or modern data warehouse consultant and architect for a while in my background. And my pet projects are definitely like the administration and governance pieces in the product. I think they are super important. And that is also why OneLake Security is one of my favorite topics right now. And I think it's a super important topic. And as you said, I'm so glad to finally see some progress there. And big thanks to Aaron Merrill, the feature PM, for that one. He's done amazing work, and I'm always happy to see the progress here and happy to speak about it.
And what was the first, I guess, year that you entered the customer advisory team program? Like before it was referred to as CAT, I guess.
Yes, it's still, so CAT is actually just the abbreviation for it. And we call ourselves the Cats, so it's our brand actually. No, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, and I've been part of the Cat since I joined Microsoft. Again, in the beginning, like the Power BI, it was focused on Power BI only. Now it's everything Fabric, but I mean, we all know Fabric has become huge, so it's quite difficult to be deep in all the different topics. So yeah, I'm still focusing on Power BI and the whole governance part, but yeah.
Well, there's been a lot of really good community members. I think the CAT team has sucked up over the years, like Rui Romano. I'm thinking like Rui, Benny, Chris Webb.
Benny Diago for sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I got quite a good number of European for MVPs essentially. I think that I actually won Australia, like Phil Seamark. Like they're
and Darren Gospel,
good percentage.
Darren Studio, amazing. No, you're right.
I keep forgetting he's on.
I've been a data platform MVP before. So that's, I think, also where we met. But it has been a fun time. We've always been kidding a little bit in Europe, saying like the MVP program is a little bit like the assessment center for Microsoft. In teams like the CAT team, I think that's definitely true. People are looking at that. And being a CAT sometimes feels like being a full day MVP. We still share the views, the feedback that we are getting from working with partners like you, working with customers directly through our account teams. So it feels like what we did in our MVP engagements, doing it like full day. So yeah, it's not always the easiest job, because we are not the ones just celebrating the programs. We are also the ones reminding everybody about what still needs to be done, what customers are missing. but it's a lot of fun most of the time.
Well, and I'm sure, get to encounter a lot of very large and unique problems that only exist when someone has 10,000 workspaces or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, you would be surprised. The ingenuity of our customers is always amazing. So that's also part of product development. I think we all who have been dealing with this for a while know. You just cannot imagine all the use cases, all the scenarios that customers are looking into. And yeah, when we're speaking
Yep.
about this kind of landscapes that we see at some customers, if you run something like a few million API calls per day, or if you have like a 6-digit number of workspaces and things like this, sometimes the product gets to its limits, and to limits we didn't even think about before. So
Yep.
yeah, this is an interesting experience.
Yeah, I've heard a few stories over the years of just doing these things for like, I never would have thought that. Yeah, it's like we didn't think that would be a problem either, but like the infrastructure, wasn't ever meant to handle like this number of a certain thing, and here we are having to work with like Fortune 100 dealing with those things.
Yeah.
But for people who are, a lot of the cat team are problem solvers, right? Like there are people who enjoy that, so it's interesting problems at scale.
Absolutely, and I mean. Some of the problems, like you said, are really just appearing at those high scales that we were speaking about. But many of the problems actually also have an impact of how smaller customers would actually interact with the product. So we're definitely trying to find a good middle ground there to build a product that can serve customers from really small to really large. But yeah, as always, at the edges, it becomes a little bit more difficult to serve everybody. But we're trying to listen to our customers and to actually try to focus on the most important topics and the most important challenges.
When thinking about like some challenges and segueing into the topic of the day today around security, where we want to get started on that conversation in terms of either like where we are now, where we've come from, what will work well for you?
Yeah, we can maybe we can start a little bit speaking about why OneLake security actually makes sense, or what our reason for investing into a new security concept is. And maybe getting back to what you said, we saw a lot of progress in the last 6 to 12 months. OneLake Security, even though it had different names at that time, we all know about the life cycle of feature names at Microsoft. It was called One Security, it was called Universal Security, but it was actually part of the whole picture from day one. Because if we think about Fabric as a service, Fabric as a platform, one of the core concepts of Fabric is OneLake. OneLake is this virtualized data lake that allows you to easily access your data, no matter if it's residing in Fabric as such, if it's persisted in Fabric, or if it's residing in other clouds, on-premise, in ADLS Gen 2. OneLake is the one thing that makes it easy for you to access the data through a single access point. You don't have to actually remember where the data is residing. You don't need all the different URLs. You don't need to think about that. But that also makes it a bit more complicated in some cases, because we need to ensure that when we are virtualizing the access to the data, we actually follow through with certain security concepts. We allow for a governance approach for all of that, because giving you access to the data needs to be done in a way that respects the governance and the security concepts that have been done before. But it also opens up opportunities, because if we're thinking about how users are interacting with the data in Fabric, and one of the concepts is you have the single access layer, you have the one copy version, and you can choose the compute that fits best to the job that you actually want to be done, no matter if you're a data analyst, no matter if you're an end user who just needs a report that is created, or if you want to create your own workload or your own compute endpoint that actually interacts with the data in OneLake. Before OneLake Security, you had to actually build your user security policies, your end user security, your data security in each of those endpoints, because you had access to the data, but the concept of Fabric mostly is that you're accessing the data in the context of the individual user. So you need to make sure that this access is secured. And if you need to do that in every single endpoint that is available for the end user, that means a lot of work, a lot of duplication of those policies. So why not actually make the use of that opportunity that the OneLake as the single access point brings you, and also govern and secure the data at that access point. So doing it at the storage layer.
There's one thing that I'll be curious to hear you as we dive into this, but I'll put this into the parking lot for now to bring up whenever you think it'll be relevant for yours. But I think myself, included with a lot of other people, there's certain tenant configurations that unless you have like somebody who is experienced in like tenant or office or like just software administration, it is a black box of switches, pages, and stuff to go configure. With the advent now that we have of like the Fabric API and other stuff, or even the Office API for like my own org, what I've actually done is I spent some time creating some secrets, especially keys with the right permissions and everything for basically an LLM with a rule set that we came up with as business criteria, written in a way that can be read by an LLM. And once a month, there's an audit where it does a scan of like configurations and new configurations via the docs, the tenant itself, and our rule set, and then basically creates a Git issue of like, hey, by the way, we did an analysis. Either A, is there anything wrong or like misconfigured? Or B, there's a few new features that are released. Like currently you used to have this switch, but this switch is now 5 switches because new things have come out. Would you like to reconfigure to keep your criteria in this? And I think it is a lot easier when done correctly to automate audits and to keep your security and your governance lock in step without having to spend hours and hours and hours reviewing stuff. So I've been very appreciative of any of the command line interfaces and APIs that are available to help you do that. Just because I think it's much easier now just to create a rule set and have a scheduled review with an LLM to check your environment if you're the admin on those. So at some point, if that comes up into it, but I think that has been a transformational thing for a lot of smaller orgs that don't have a dedicated admin, but they still know that they need to do that because it is easier for people to start hacking into stuff now with LLMs, which means that smaller businesses now need to be definitely a lot more cautious of that. So just as a thought, but I'll be curious to know where that can segue into the conversation later.
Oh, that's amazing. It actually fits in perfectly well. And like you said, especially with smaller organizations, you, for example, don't have a concept of data owners, for example, that are responsible. So if I take a small step back, what you were mentioning is super relevant, but this is also like the administration of the full Fabric tenant, for example, or your full Entra tenant, however large you want to scale it. And that is a super relevant aspect. And when we're speaking about security as a sub matter of the administration part, we actually even there have to distinguish between different security aspects. I'm always thinking about it like Matrushka or shoebox or onion principle, however you want to call it. Security comes in layers. First part is like the network security, who is actually allowed to interact with Fabric under which circumstances. You need multi-factor authentication. You maybe only allow it when you're in the company VPN. Which endpoints is Fabric allowed to interact with? So how can you prevent that somebody unintentionally writes out to a public storage account, for example, something like this? How can you prevent data exfiltration? So this is the outer shell, if you want to, or the outer layer. And then when you go one step closer to the actual data, you have the actual user permission management in terms of
Yep.
now the user actually interacted, connected to Fabric, authenticated. Which actions is the user allowed to take on which Fabric items? That is typically where we use workspace security, like the workspace roles. Or if we need to be a little bit more fine-grained, we go down to item level security. So this is actually configuring which privileges does a user have. So is a user allowed to create a workspace? Is a user allowed to add members to a workspace? Is a user allowed to create new items in the workspace, edit the items, delete? Or is the user just allowed to interact with the items with a read permission? So all of this is like what we call the control plane permissions. And then if we get to the inner part of the security onion, you're getting to the data plane permissions. That actually means, okay, the user is allowed to interact with the lakehouse, but the lakehouse contains a set of data, which could be files, which are stored in folders, which could be tables in your table section. And to which tables and to which portion of the table, which column and which rows in the table does the user actually have access? Because we all know, typically, especially in larger organizations, but in many cases, even in smaller organizations, not every user in the organization is allowed to have access to all the information. That could be because it's PII data. It could be because it's HR data. It could be because it's sales information, it's salary information, whatever. There are so many reasons why data access needs to be restricted. And this inner part is where OneLake Security actually fits in. But overall, you're spot on. It's not only about making it to create a concept that helps here. It's also important to make it manageable. And APIs
exactly.
it's super relevant.
And as long as you have those patterns written down in a rule book somewhere, where as an example, ideally if your intra things are set up correctly with roles, certain roles should only have these permissions. You can again have similar scans. If you ever see that somebody with an assigned role has an elevated permission in a scan of a workspace, like that could also be an auto audit that you can set up either in a notebook with Copilot, anywhere. Like you can just but like you can be auto alerted for a lot of this stuff. I do know we can talk for ages on some of this, and sometimes a little bit of showing is always good. If you're ready, we can flip over to the screen and kind of get into some of this too. Perfect.
Absolutely. So this is just a demo workspace that I created. I can explain a little bit more about that at a later stage. So let's think about a standard hub and spoke concept. So you have like a central workspace where your central IT team sets up the connection to your data sources, create a lakehouse with data that is ready to be analyzed. And that should be shared with different business departments in their own spokes, so they can actually create their own content on top. This is a scenario that we see at a lot of larger customers, but it also might make sense for smaller customers if it's easy enough to actually set up like a kind of template that you can roll out. And in this hub workspace, just for simplification, I have a lakehouse that is filled from a pipeline that is actually pushing in the data. So let's think about this hub as our goat layer if we're thinking about medallion architecture principle here. I created a few semantic models and reports, nothing too special. And like you said, what is important for people is starting with actually checking who has access to that workspace. And that is something that you can see either in your workspace overview as well, going to manage access. But if you are the central admin, like you said, and even if you're a small organization, maybe you have 20 or 30 workspaces, not more than that, but it's tedious to actually go into every single workspace manually and check who are the people there. And like you said, there are APIs that can help you. Another aspect, another concept that you can use is actually using your OneLake catalog, for example, with the secure tab in the OneLake catalog that allows you at a glance for yourself to check on all the workspaces that you have access to, and check about who has access, who is responsible. And that is actually a relatively new release. Nowadays, you can even manage access across multi-workspaces and assign permissions for multi-users. So while before, if you wanted to do it manually, you had to do every workspace separately, assign users individually or security groups individually. Nowadays, you can do it multi-workspace and multi-users or groups in this part. But this is still the UI part. This is nice to make yourself acquainted with this or check something on the fly. But like you said, the important piece is to make it easier and to allow AI, for example, to support you, or use APIs to programmatically do it. And when we're speaking about the next part, the OneLake Security, the data access, there is full API support to do that. So you have APIs to manage all the security roles in your items through APIs, either in bulk or individually. And as part of the Fabric skill, there is a OneLake Security skill that also helps you if you want to use AI to support you with that, by actually what you described before, providing that extra context that makes it easier for AI, for the agent that you build, to understand which APIs do I use, what is the information that I need. So this is something which comes built in as part of the product.
Well, the thing that I really like, in general, to your point, is like you need the ability to explore tooling internally or externally that gives you a much higher, like I always call it the 35,000 foot level. So I usually use a plane analogy when doing any type of analysis. Like if you're flying the plane, that's 35,000 feet, but then you also have like things in between or ground level. But yeah, starting from the top down to be able to give you that holistic view is very important.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we're looking, for example, at the hub workspace that I just saw, that I just showed before, you see that in that hub workspace, I can now easily here, for example, see all the OneLake Security rows that I have. See my location, this is the workspace. I see the item that contains the role, which is my lakehouse in this scenario. And from here, I can drill in. So it's easy. It makes it intuitive to check and understand from a central location. Again, it's not the perfect tool to maintain at scale, absolutely, but it's very good to make yourself acquainted or check something on the side. And from here, you can actually jump into your lakehouse back to the scenario that we saw before, and you can maintain your data here. And like I mentioned, first thing, workspace access. We checked on that one. We see which workspace we're in. And then if we're back, we can actually look into our OneLake security, into our data level security or data plane security that we want to maintain. And you can easily create or delete new roles here. You can maintain the existing roles that you have. And these kinds of roles allow you to configure which part of the data in your lakehouse in this scenario, or as an alternative in a mirrored database or in a mirrored catalog, which tables and files in this item are actually exposed to which user or which group, which is done by setting up a simple role where you first define which data is actually part of that role. In this case, for example, I set up permissions on the schema DBO in the table section of my lakehouse, which we can see on the left side. And I assigned the folder some stuff details as a subfolder in my file sections, for example, which is access. So I can easily see, first of all, which part of the table and file section are covered by this role. I can see which members I have in this role, which in this case is just a simple user, but of course it could also be a security group which can help maintain that, for example. And then I can go even deeper and I can actually check, for example, which row level security limitations I have created. So in this scenario, for example, the members of this row are only allowed to see any kind of information in the store table for the country Germany. So super simple. We decided to go for SQL, T-SQL as a dialect to actually define those constraints or those conditions, how you define the security. First of all, a lot of people still speak SQL. It's relatively easy to create. A lot of systems understand and speak SQL. Also, if we're thinking about migration concepts, it's easy to do that. And yeah, so this is how you can define it. And you could also define column level security, which I didn't create in this row. But if we're, for example, looking into another row, there I also created the column level security condition, which it's something
No,
which
I'm curious about. I was just going to say, like, so on this, coming from a Power BI perspective, and like the story is different here, but speaking on behalf of people who are used to setting up security in a semantic model, which is different than database security. So generally, like the rule of thumb with a lot of posts and stuff is you normally don't combine object level security with row level security in a semantic model because that can cause complications and weird friction. But from that perspective of somebody who's coming to this, the first thought might be, oh, well, like we shouldn't do both. But there is a different story behind that. So like that, I wanted maybe to give you a chance to kind of speak to like using one, the other, or both of them in this context from somebody who's maybe only ever set up security in semantic models before.
That's an amazing point. And I'm also specifically I sometimes deliver a conference session about OneLake Security from a Power BI developer perspective. Because
nice.
It's a fun viewpoint. And I actually think if you're coming from a Power BI side of things, the differences are not that huge. The concept is more or less the same. I mean, even in a Power BI row level security role that you create in a semantic model, you create a role, you define what is actually visible to that role, who are the members of that role, and then you can define your RLS and CLS. And I'm with you. Combining RLS and CLS is a tricky thing. And that is a challenge that we also need to understand when we will be speaking about OneLake Security, because what OneLake Security generally does is it's a policy engine that actually is presented with those concepts, with those conditions that we are seeing, and that is translating this into something which is presented to the different compute engines like Warehouse or Power BI, for example. And there it's translated more or less into the security concepts that are already there. So this OneLake security role in Power BI would be translated into Power BI security. A little bit simply oversimplified, but more or less that's how it works. Which also means Power BI is not able to work with something that it wasn't able to work with before. So especially when it comes to the challenges of how do I combine roles for a user from a row level security perspective, or what happens with column level security, Power BI as such as a workload didn't change. So if a user is assigned two different roles, one with RLS and CLS and another one only with RLS, Power BI will break. Power BI will not be able to actually interpret this because it still feels like a heterogeneous schema or a non-deterministic schema. So from a Power BI perspective, when you are creating your OneLake security roles, when you're creating your role concept, you still have to keep in mind which workloads you want to use and what this workloads is actually able to interpret. So Spark is working with that. Spark doesn't have an issue with that. It can actually represent even a combination of roles with different CLS conditions. but SQL cannot do that, and Power BI cannot do that either. So from a Power BI perspective, we still are facing the same limitations, and the same concepts would still be a good choice for creating the OneLake security role concept.
I like the fact that, well, I was just saying, like, I do like that you also provided a whole presentation on this, because like the persona drives a lot of how you would understand new topics, because you have to relate to what's familiar, right? And somebody coming from a database perspective, I think would probably be a lot more familiar with a lot of the security practices. But we also have a lot of people who have had to upgrade themselves to a Fabric admin in many organizations, coming from only like an analyst and Power BI developer perspective. Like I'm one of those. Like I was more front end than back end. So there are new concepts where it's it's putting like a square peg in a round hole, because there's such a hybrid of so many engineering practices that come into Fabric from back end to front end.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm with you. And actually, the challenge that you mentioned, for you have to switch your viewpoint. You have to actually wear somebody else's shoes, or walk a mile in somebody else's shoes to understand how that works. This is something which, from a OneLake security perspective, we have to do with all the different viewpoints. So if you're speaking about you had to become a Fabric administrator, that is a much larger range than just the security piece, but the security piece is an important aspect of it. And when we're speaking about Power BI security, how you set it up, now when we're thinking about OneLake security, the team that needs to develop this needs to look at it from the Power BI security or Power BI developer perspective, the SQL developer perspective, the Spark developer perspective, the Event House developer perspective. And we need to come up with something that works for all the different engines. And that is part of the challenge. And that is also one of the reasons why it's taking us so long, because one thing is setting up the security engine in the middle. The other one is the workloads actually embracing this, integrating with this. And for example, in the context of Power BI, adopting some new aspects, implementing some new aspects. So I do hope that OneLake Security might be a driver for Power BI to actually learn to more flexibly interpret column level security. What I hope is that OneLake Security over time will be a driver for us to see dynamic data masking in Power BI. Because dynamic data masking is something that works in SQL. It is something that we will need in OneLake Security. And I do hope that this will actually lead to Power BI, and I'm not saying in the next few weeks or month, but over time, we'll also be able to work with dynamic data masking. And that could be an opportunity to solve other challenges that we saw before.
Then I'll mirror actually on that, as someone who's grown from a Power BI developer to to a team that does data platform design, working with everything from Fabric, Snowflake, Databricks, Click, and all these other platforms. Like data masking is something that clients ask for occasionally, and I do think it is the gap that we have today that, to your point, could hopefully be closed. Ideally sometime in the near future, because I think as data requirements get maybe not more complex, I think they've always been there, but the closer you get to the pot at the end of the rainbow, the stronger the desire is for people to want more features. It's I don't know if they have this in Germany, but there's a famous book in the US, like a kid's book. If you give a mouse a cookie, they're going to want a glass of milk. They might have an analogy in Germany, but it's like you give them an inch, they ask for a mile. I think the more you start to incorporate enterprise level features, like, oh well, you did this, you should be able to do this now too. So I think the appetite is getting hungrier for some of these things that used to be like, it was never in the analytics layer before. It was only ever in database layers, but now because we have this hybrid environment between the two, I do think that hunger for wanting more of these types of things, of like partial masking, dynamic masking, and all this other stuff, I think it will come at some point. I'm sure it's just a matter of when, but I think that will make a lot of people happy, including some clients that I know are eagerly waiting for that.
Absolutely. I'm 100% with you there. And there actually is a similar saying in Germany. With us, it's more like if you give somebody a finger, they will try and take the full hand. But
Yeah,
it's
exactly.
the same concept. No, I'm with you. And I think that is also something we can always think about when we're speaking with clients about what Fabric is actually adding to Power BI. Because I mean, our storyline with Fabric, or part of Fabric, was with Power BI, we reached certain thresholds, we reached certain limitations where if we wanted to extend Power BI to have a stronger ETL, to have a stronger data platform aspect, we could have either tried to re-implement everything in Power BI, or we could have added additional workloads to give you a full tool set that allows you to do all of the things with technology that was already there, combining them into a single offering or adding on. But I think what we also shouldn't neglect is that this can also trigger changes in Power BI as such, like enhancing functionality, improving certain functionality that we were missing before, giving us new angles and drives to actually do certain things. And I really love to see what we where and when we will see those changes happening in the Power BI engine. But as we both come from a Power BI perspective, there is one important aspect I really want to call out when a Power BI developer now starts thinking about implementing something with OneLake Security, which I think is super important. Because, as I said, my feeling is OneLake Security is relatively easy to understand for a Power BI developer who is used to Power BI RLS roles. But there is a very, very important change in how you define your policy, because Power BI has the concept of relationships. And we can actually propagate security through relationships in Power BI, which as we all know, in some cases, or in the simpler cases, we are defining our security on our dimension tables, like the store table, for example. And then from there, through the relationship from the dimension table to the fact table, the security context is actually propagated. So because of the relationship, a user who has a limitation in the store table to only see stores in the country Germany would also only see the related facts in the fact table. This is something which, of course, we could have kept when OneLake Security is actually translated. But there's a big aspect that we cannot neglect. And the aspect, this challenge, is a user should get the same result no matter which endpoint they are using. So if a user opens a Power BI report or runs a DAX query, if the user runs a SQL query, or if a user runs the Spark query, they should get the same result. And SQL, to a certain degree, understands relationships, but Warehouse, for example, doesn't have the concept of keys, of key relationships. And Spark doesn't know the concept of relationships. So this propagation of security context through relationships doesn't work for other endpoints. Which means if we try to find an engine, a concept that is actually working with this common denominator that allows a user to get the same result no matter which endpoint, we also need to sometimes trim in some workloads what we already have available. And that is the case here in Power BI, which means that if I would define my permissions only on the dimension table, then my user would only see the stores in my store dimension, but the user would still see all the sales data, all the fact data, because the security context is not propagated. That means in my current scenario and in this role, for example, I only define security on the store table. But if I'm looking at this Germany RLS role, for example, here I actually went down and also created a security policy on my fact table, on my sales table. And this is one of the important limitations that we have right now, because I actually need to define here what in Power BI would be happening automatically if I configure my relationship to be to respect security or propagate security. I need to filter my sales table based on all my entries in the store table that belong to Germany. But I don't have that attribute in my fact table. So right now, in the current design phase of OneLake Security, the only thing I can do is I can actually look up those store keys during my ETL process. And I can define, like here, an in statement saying, like, filter down my sales table based on all the store keys that belong to Germany. Which also means if a new store is opened up in Germany, I would need to find this out in my ETL process and update my security policy. Or as an alternative, I could add the country column to my fact table and use it there. But we all know, I mean, we have tools like Measure Killer that can help us, for example, to clean up our tables and our models. But we all know what happens if you add a column to a table. Somebody will create a report or a model that is using that column in the table, and you will never get rid of it. So I always prefer updating the security policies as long as this attribute is not changing too frequently. And through APIs, through AI support, you can do that very easily. But so this is what we have right now. But the good thing is, this is just a temporary problem, because if we're looking at the Fabric roadmap, for example, there is something, and let me maybe show that real quick. If we are looking at the Fabric roadmap, for example, in the OneLake section, there is an announcement for the OneLake Security for this quarter, that we are working on multi-table RLS, which would mean in the scenario that we saw before, I could create a join in my condition. I could say, select all from DBO sales, inner join DBO store, where store country equals Germany. Of course, this is not the correct T-SQL syntax, but you know what I mean. And we're working on implementation of dynamic security. So something we use in Power BI a lot too, where you have a security table with the user principal name, and you hand over the user principal name to filter it down. So both those additions to the complexity of what you can define in OneLake Security is something that is coming this quarter. So temporary limitation, something you need to be aware of, but luckily something which we are planning to address very, very soon.
Let me drop that roadmap into here. Roadmap dot. Is it just roadmap dot? Here we go. Microsoft Fabric roadmap.
It's aka.ms Fabric roadmap. Yeah, but let's definitely make sure to drop the links here.
Now I'll queue up a good question here. I'm sure there's plenty of things on the roadmap that are not on here that you can't talk about. Is there anything that's not on the roadmap here, but that has at least been posted about, or just something that you can discuss that is like a thing that you're excited about, or that's upcoming, or anything that's just not covered on there that is something that you're like, look towards this, I'm excited about this thing that is coming to us in the future?
So there is one huge topic that is not posted here that I'm super excited about, and that is actually coming. But this is not affecting OneLake Security, at least not yet. But it is something which is super relevant from the admin persona perspective. and that topic is fabric policies. That has already been announced somewhat at FabCon Atlanta this year, but it has been still a little bit under the hood, a little bit quiet. But it is something which we are working on. And if you are coming from an Azure background and if you're aware of what Azure policies can do, it's a similar concept for Fabric, and there are good reasons why we don't just reuse Azure policies, but are creating Fabric policies. But especially from what you said, from the admin persona perspective, from somebody who had to grow up and to actually take over the admin persona in an organization, together with what you said, the opportunities through APIs and AI to actually make your life easier, Fabric policies will be a great addition to that one, and that will unblock a lot of scenarios over time. So we're in early stages, but this is something I'm super excited about. For OneLake Security, I've already mentioned like dynamic data masking. There's one other aspect in OneLake Security that we are working on, but it's not where we don't have an official timeline yet. But there is a concept that we have always been missing in Power BI security, which is the concept of a deny policy. Right now, we have allow policies, which means you can say in role A, users are allowed to see all the data for one country and all products, for example, or all product groups. And in role B, they are allowed to see the data for just one product group, but all countries. And if a user gets assigned both roles, those roles work additive. They work like a union. So in the end, what happens is, as in one row, the user is allowed to see all countries, and in the other row, the user is allowed to see all product groups. In the end, the user will be allowed to see everything. With pure allow sets, as we have right now, it's not possible to create these kind of mixed scenarios where you want to limit certain aspects. And that is why we used a lot of dynamic security in the past. With a deny, that can be possible, because then you could set up a deny clause that says you are not allowed to see product group XYZ for country ABC. And this deny will overrule everything. It will be the strongest aspect of a policy. So it will be regarded over all the allow sets that you had before. And what I'm especially excited about is that this opens up opportunities for a more manageable security. If you think, for example, about Microsoft Information Protection, where you are creating policies based on the sensitivity of your data. And with a strong deny, we could, for example, define policies based on MIP that will overrule the policies in your OneLake Security. So think about, you have a lakehouse with highly confidential data that is only allowed for internal usage. And you have your data security policies set up, and you have a security group assigned to that. And somebody just doesn't pay attention and adds an external FTE to that security group. And suddenly somebody external has access to that data. With a deny based on the sensitivity of the data that is preventing external FTEs to access this data, you could actually overrule this. And one other amazing opportunity that is arising from there, something we never managed to do in the past, and I heard clients asking for that. You could also use the deny to prevent data access for admins, members, and contributors by default.
Okay.
And that is something which I think you also are aware of. You might be a workspace admin, or you're the Fabric administrators and can assign yourself to a workspace for just purely configurational aspects, maintaining all the rest of the administration,
Mm.
but you actually shouldn't have access to the data. And with a strong deny, this could be possible. We could set up a rule saying like nobody has access to XYZ, to all the data. As an admin, of course, you could change that role. You could give yourself access to the data, but suddenly it becomes an auditable action. And that is good enough for most scenarios. As long as you can track that somebody suddenly gets access to the data, if it's audited, it's a different scenario. And that is not the near-term roadmap, maybe, nothing which is already on here, but those two aspects, the strong deny and the dynamic data masking, those two aspects I'm super excited about. And I do hope we
the one that you just mentioned too, Data Hubert was just mentioning that that'll be really good for HR data.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I think I like the topics that you mentioned around the deny functionality. I think that will add, plus also with a lot of auditing and automation, I think will go a long ways to push for some of this stuff. But yeah, no, that's really good to hear that at least is on the long-term roadmap, even if not on the near-term roadmap.
Yeah, I'm with you there. As I said, I'm very excited about those ones. Yeah.
Nice, excellent.
Cool.
All right, where do we want to go to next?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think from a baseline perspective, we discussed what OneLake Security is actually able to do as of today. We see there have been there's a baseline set, which actually is GA. We saw some important updates coming in during since FabCon Atlanta. So OneLake Security as such is GA. The APIs to maintain OneLake Security are GA. And we have GA support from a read perspective for Lakehouse and all the Spark aspects. We have the SQL Analytics endpoint. We have the concept of Power BI is GA, and the graph database integration is also GA since recently, plus Event House in public preview. So we're also seeing progress in terms of which items do support OneLake Security. But maybe two more smaller aspects, or two more important aspects, actually, I would want to address. Because as I mentioned, in this scenario that we are seeing here, we have been residing in a hub workspace, like a typical scenario where the central IT team is providing access or is creating and preparing, curating, cleaning up the data in a central workspace. And now they want the business departments should be empowered to create their own semantic models, their own reports, their own Spark notebooks or Python notebooks to analyze the data. But of course, you don't want to grant them contributor or member access to your central workspace, because you want to ensure that nobody can tinker with the data here. So what you would do instead is you would, for example, create a hub workspace, a spoke workspace for each business department or several ones. And as we can see here, this would be done by creating a lakehouse in that spoke workspace that is connecting to the hub workspace through shortcuts. And shortcuts in this scenario are an important aspect, because the security is propagated through the shortcuts as long as the shortcuts are in pass-through mode. And just a very quick explanation about that. We have two different modes in shortcuts, which is either pass-through. The user context is actually handed down. It's the user context. So if a user is actually interacting with the report, the user context is handed down to the semantic model in direct lake mode, down to the lakehouse, and from the lakehouse in the spoke space, it is even handed down towards the lakehouse in the hub workspace. So we can ensure in this scenario that in the hub workspace, I can have full control, even if I'm allowing other teams to create shortcuts and create their own content, I can centrally control who has access to that data. And in many scenarios, that is very neat, because in this scenario, I can make sure that I have a central overview of who has access to this, and I can maintain everything. But if we're thinking about large organizations again, you have maybe like not 5 business departments with their own spokes, but maybe you have like 1,000 workspaces. You have like 10,000 end users that you would need to maintain. In those scenarios, you probably don't want to maintain 10,000 end users, even through security groups in your hub lakehouse. Plus, in larger organizations, they are sometimes very hesitant, and we have things like, yeah, it's okay if they create their reports, but they won't get access to our lakehouse. We don't want that. And for that scenario, we, and also just very recently, announced the opportunity to create shortcuts in delegated mode in OneLake. Delegated mode means when I'm setting up the shortcut, I'm actually defining a fixed identity that is used to obtain the data through the shortcut. So everybody who is interacting with this lakehouse, if the shortcut is set in delegated mode, so every end user will see the same data, which is the data that the fixed identity that is getting the data from the hub lakehouse is actually allowed to see. So I could set up a service principal for each business department, and I could narrow down which data that business department is allowed to see. And then with a shortcut in delegated mode, I could go to my spoke space and my spoke lakehouse. And with the shortcut in delegated mode, I can now create OneLake security policies on top of this shortcut. And I can do the fine-grained policy control, the fine-grained access control in my spoke workspace, because I know better which user is allowed to do what. I have better overview of which users are switching roles or switching departments or moving in and out of the organization. So with this step, we can also somehow break this down. And if we, again, go to Power BI, we have the same concept. It is like if instead of using direct lake mode in my semantic model, I would use import mode, or I would set up direct lake mode with a fixed identity. In both those cases, I still would need to configure my defined end user access control inside my semantic model. And more or less the same you're now able to do through shortcuts. And that is an important aspect here.
Well, I think to your point is it allows for better scalability and lower technical debt. Like I think that with a lot of this stuff, I think a big component with scale is not letting the technical debt scale at a 1-to-1 ratio as you get more complex in your organization. Otherwise, it becomes like a person's entire job to manage a lot of this stuff. So anywhere you can do to either automate or provide any way to do something more easily at scale with less like line by line interaction and edits is a very powerful tool, I think, for organizations to save time and cost.
Absolutely. And scaling is a super important aspect here, but also the flexibility to define your security concept in the best fitting way to your needs, because you might actually have a standard data access principle for what an end user can see, but maybe in a certain business scenario, you need to actually change this, adopt this to a specific scenario. And with OneLake Security, you more or less can define your baseline that is working for everybody, for every scenario. But with the concept of delegated shortcuts, you can also create those specific scenarios and use cases without the need of actually copying the data and creating your own new copy and your own new version. You can still use shortcuts, but you have the full flexibility to configure it in exactly the way that you need it.
Out of curiosity, I think to play devil's advocate on asking you for like a Christmas list, like what is something that isn't on a roadmap or just isn't available today, something that you would love to see as a Christmas list if you were to ask Santa for a wish of something to like show up tomorrow. Do you have one or like a couple of items that you'd love to see like popping into this as a new feature or implementation?
Yeah, I mean, you already made me share a little bit about what is coming next, and to be honest, I'm very, very strongly invested into that one. So the deny part is actually the thing I'm most excited about, because it just opens up a lot more in terms of the abilities that we are able to do. But another, I mean, it's simple to say, but I'm really, really praying for all the other Fabric items to be able to finish their integration work, and all the Fabric items to actually support OneLake Security. Because I understand why it's not maybe the biggest need right now, because OneLake Security as such is still evolving. But with all the changes that are coming with multi-table, with dynamic security, but especially then with deny, I think this is a very, very relevant scenario which can work very beneficially for a lot of customer use cases. And I would love if the decision against it would not depend on the workload. So if it's warehouse, I mean, Event House is already in preview. If it's SQL databases, all of those aspects, if it's Cosmos DB, I would really love to see OneLake Security fully integrated with all Fabric items.
Well, I'm very, very much on the support of getting the deny functionality fleshed out, but and I'll just circle back as well on my wish list with the dynamic masking. I think will be a big one as well, like getting that fully integrated in all item types, essentially that we'd have between the SQL database, the warehouses, the lake houses, like to the point where you don't have to pick an item based off of the decision of that. And I think like long term, it's I think that would be a nice feature to be able to just have as part of the platform, is you're picking an item based on what you need it to do versus what it can't do, kind of a thing. It's on a wants rather than limitations. And like we're getting better at that. I know, like as an example, just a couple of anecdotal things on that is the like shortcuts still can't be done between lake houses and warehouses due to the SQL layer. And it's little things like that, where it's like once you remove all these like small barriers, then it really just becomes a feature choice, not a limitations choice. And I think that will really cement it as like an enterprise, like a full enterprise platform once those like remaining things get ironed out. But like with any rock, right? Like the moment you fix one thing and you snip the Hydra's head, 3 others appear. So like the wish list will always continue to grow. But yeah, I think dynamic masking will be a big one. Do you know word about?
I'm with you there.
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm fully with you there. So
perfect. We're at about 10:35. Is there, to wrap up, is there any remaining things that you want to show or demo or anything else to kind of start close off the conversations at all, or?
I'm good. I would say what I wanted to share is OneLake Security is definitely there to stay. OneLake Security already is a good starting point. I would really highly recommend to everybody to start playing around with it, to get yourself accustomed to it. From a maintenance perspective, it's already pretty amazing. From a functional perspective, there is opportunities, and we are chasing those opportunities. But it's becoming better and better and stronger. Depending on which workloads you use, it's already a good opportunity. And with multi-table and dynamic RLS, if you're coming from a Spark or from a Power BI perspective, I really would recommend thinking about when OneLake Security would be the choice for you instead of sticking to the Power BI row-level security, for example. And with Spark, it's actually enabling a lot of opportunities. What I also want to just call out is there are still what we sometimes nicely call paper cuts. There are still some I would call it bugs in the UI where certain aspects are not working. So, for example, if you're setting up a shortcut with OneLake Security or and row-level security roles, you cannot use the preview in the lakehouse. If you're a contributor, member, or admin, you can still do it when you're a viewer. That doesn't mean that it's not propagated through the shortcut. If you're running a Spark query or a SQL query, it's working. It's more like a specific scenario we still have to work on and do. And rest assured, we're working on all of those aspects. If you have findings, let us know. We definitely want to make this as perfect as possible. What I wanted to say is it's not perfect yet, but it's growing significantly. There's a lot of good things in the pipeline. It will become one of the most important aspects for me to actually make OneLake the central piece, especially as the concept is not limited to Fabric. It is open to integrate also with workloads, with endpoints outside Fabric. So if you want, for example, to create your own application against data in OneLake, you will be able to tie in to OneLake with OneLake Security. So it is something which can even work for you in those other scenarios. So it's definitely worthwhile looking into this, getting started with this, and not be frightened away by maybe some gaps, some challenges we still need to overcome. We are working on this, and I'm very excited about what is to come.
I'm looking forward to seeing a lot of the updates and the evolution of this for sure. But it's come a long way. I think in the last few years, the certain things were, I think, came a little later than the initial release of Fabric and all that, but I think it's done a good job of catching up in the last 12 months to get it to a place that's like it's at the good enough level for a good 90% of people out there, with the remaining headaches, not necessarily any major blockers versus like minor blockers, kind of at this point with certain things. So it's the parity of like what's needed versus what's available is getting closer and closer with that like Venn diagram overlap.
Yes, I agree.
Excellent. Let me put this to here. Then I want to thank you. So let me double check comments. Oh yeah, here we go. Let me actually, I missed one from Donald. So let me bring this up. Can OneLake Security be applied to Databricks Unity Catalog mirrored tables?
Yes. So excellent question. So when we're speaking about OneLake Security, we have two different concepts. We have the items that can be used to define security rules, that are the items that actually own the tables in the OneLake, either the lakehouse, the warehouse, which doesn't support it right now, the Unity Catalog Mirror, for example, but also mirror databases. And lakehouse, mirror databases, and catalog mirrors already support the creation of OneLake Security policy. The other aspect is the interaction, the integration when you read the data, when you consume the data from the OneLake tables. But as the Unity Catalog Mirror tables are typically used in either Power BI or in Spark workloads, for example, those two items already support OneLake Security integration, so that's there. So yes, you can create OneLake Security policies in your Unity Catalog Mirror. and those policies would be respected by Spark or by Power BI, for example.
Excellent. And then, yeah, Otto wanted to say thank you. He learned a lot from this. Fantastic.
I'm glad to hear that.
Excellent. I think I'll just wrap up by saying thanks for coming on with sharing a lot of this. I think there's a lot of really good updates in here and insights into some of the more recent configurations that you can apply within kind of the fabric security methodology that's in there, and looking forward as well to seeing just what's going to be coming out on the roadmap. For the people tuning in later, check out the link that I dropped into the chat, and it will also be in the YouTube description on the roadmap. It's an evolving tool, so that will continually rotate out things that are planned and have been delivered. So keep an eye on that if you want to see what's up and coming, kind of with the fabric and anything else for the platform itself. But with that being said, Gabi, thank you so much for taking time out of your Thursday evening to come on for this. It's a pleasure as always. You'll be at FabCon in Europe. Okay, excellent. So yeah, Steve and I have a booth that we got there for our company. So I will see you there in Barcelona for that in 7 weeks, right? 6 weeks, yeah, exactly. Amazing. Perfect. Well, then, with that being said, have a good rest of your evening, everyone. Thanks for the questions and tuning in, and I'll see you all on the next stream.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely.